7 years ago, I had an epiphany moment. I met a young woman named Aditi in Mumbai. She was 14 years old, she was sweet, she was fresh-faced, but she told me a story that broke my heart. When she was 12 years old, a man had come to her village in rural Bengal and offered her family the equivalent of $200 to bring her as a servant to a big city. Now, her family had 5 daughters, and they weren't able to pay the dowry for all of them, and so they agreed. Unfortunately for Aditi, she found herself trafficked into sex slavery in Mumbai. And she was selling sex to 18 men every single night in Kamatipura in the red light district. Today, you hear stories like this all the time, but to me, it was extremely personal. My father grew up in rural Bengal during the famine that killed 3 million people in 1943. A few years later, partition displaced 12 million more. If he hadn't done extremely well for himself and made it through college, that could have been me in that village. That could have been me trafficked into sex slavery. I met Aditi when I was visiting a member of the Global Youth Coalition on HIV/AIDS, a network that I co-founded in 2004 when I was 22 with a group of diverse young leaders from around the world. I peppered her with questions about her HIV risk. Did she have condoms? Did she have access to testing for sexually transmitted diseases? Did she have access to services? And the answer was no, she didn't. I asked Aditi, if you could do anything besides being a sex worker, what would you do? And she said to me in Bengali, Didi, which means big sister, what else could I do? Who would marry me now? How could I go back? I heard stories like Aditi's all the time. Stories about choice, about power, about circumstance. The young Cambodian who was addicted to heroin, and he was thrown in jail because he had a clean needle on him instead of sharing the same dirty syringe with his friends. Or the young Nigerian woman who was married at a young age off to a man who was HIV positive, and her church told her the only way to stay HIV negative was to abstain from sex completely because condoms would send her straight to hell. Or the young women in KwaZulu-Natal, South Africa, who had a 50-50 chance of being raped the first time that they had sex. In 2004, when we started the network, 7,000 young people were being infected with HIV every single day. People in Washington, D.C., and people in Geneva were making decisions about what young people needed. Do you think that people in Washington can make decisions about young people here in Raval, in Barcelona? We need paella programs, not McDonald's programs. The United States has spent over $1 billion on abstinence-only until marriage programs. What they're coming up with really had nothing to do with the realities of young people's lives. They were treating young people like one homogeneous entity that simply needed to be told what to do and everything would be fine. But the problem is that AIDS is a disease unlike any other. It exposes the racism, the intolerance, the prejudice, the homophobia, and the misogyny that are rampant in every single culture. Young people exist precisely at the intersection of all of these prejudices and taboos, and that affects their ability to make decisions about their bodies and their lives. But I'm not here to tell you a story about risk takers or victims. I'm here to tell you a story about young people who rejected the status quo and seized the reins. They knew how to solve the problems in their communities. They weren't the leaders of tomorrow. They were the leaders of today. They knew how to influence their peers, to adopt new behaviors, to change norms, and how to reach young people in hard-to-reach places. So GYCA disrupted the global order. Before 2004, it would have taken millions of dollars to create a network that reached people in 173 countries. But just at that time, online social networking had come onto the scene. And so we were able to create a digital platform that connected young people to the opportunities, skills, knowledge, and resources they needed to be effective agents of change in their own communities. We gave young people a seat at the table with ministers of health, finance, and education when they were making decisions about young people's bodies and lives. We gave young people interactive e-courses on how to manage a project, on how to conduct a political advocacy campaign, and how to write a grant proposal. And we gave them seed funding as well as face-to-face training opportunities because young people in grassroots communities would have very little chance of accessing funding from typical donors. And so it caught on like wildfire. It grew from 400 young people when we started to over 7,000 today. We turned young people at the grassroots level into global leaders. Young people like Himakshi Piplani. She took an e-course with us when she was 19 years old, and then she went on to help lead a campaign across India to guarantee sex education in schools when 12 states had banned it. And India has 1.2 billion people, so clearly they need some sex education. Or people like Edgar Makona in Kenya. He learned that medical male circumcision can prevent HIV by 70%, and now he's advising the World Health Organization on how to reach young Kenyans with the service. Or like Walter Churches, who was a very dear friend of mine. He was living with HIV and he was gay. He became an MTV digital reporter, but then he was murdered in 2008 for speaking out like others, for others like him. Together with the global community, we've been able to achieve amazing things. In 1 decade, infections have fallen among young people by 27%. Countries are now collecting data specifically on young people, recognizing that their needs are different from those of children and those of adults. Large development organizations have now offered young people a seat at the table when they're making decisions about their lives. But our progress is being threatened. Young people are growing complacent and infections are rising. Right now, 40% of new infections are among young people. And in Eastern Europe and Central Asia, where young people are injecting drugs, infections are exploding. Right now, only 24% of young women and 36% of young men know how to protect themselves from HIV. Now that we know that getting people on AIDS treatment can lower the amount of HIV in their bodies and make it more difficult for them to pass it on, the global community is saying, the end is in sight, let's just get everybody on treatment, it'll be fine. But in reality, today, only half of those who need treatment are actually receiving it. For every 1 person that we put on treatment, 4 more are infected. Today, we have the largest generation of young people in human history at 1.6 billion people. Their transformative power is enormous if we allow ourselves to listen and take note. I firmly believe that every young person has the right to a safe, healthy, and enjoyable sex life. Young people like Aditi from 7 years ago. So those of you today who are parents, those of you who are thinking about being parents, talk to your kids about sex and drugs. Everybody here needs to know their status and get tested. Professionals in the room, as you climb, lift young people along with you. Voters, support politicians who base their decisions on science, not on wishful thinking. And young people, you are never too inexperienced, too young, too black, too poor, or too gay to use your influence to speak out, your passion to demand your rights, and your power to change the world.